The homeless veteran shares his last dollar with a stranger, unaware she's the CEO looking for someone to trust. Michael Winters clutched the single-dollar bill between his weathered fingers, the green paper worn soft from being folded and unfolded countless times throughout the day. It was all he had left, the sum total of his worldly wealth after a morning of people hurrying past his cardboard sign without meeting his eyes. December in Boston carried a particular kind of cold that seemed to bypass clothing entirely, seeping directly into bones. Michael knew this cold intimately now, though there had been a time, a lifetime ago it seemed, when he'd been insulated from such realities by the comforts of a home, a job, a purpose. The Veterans Affairs Office had promised to process his case soon, but soon had stretched into weeks then months. His military pension checks had stopped coming after a computer error listed him as deceased, a bureaucratic death that proved harder to undo than he could have imagined. Without an address or phone, fighting the system became nearly impossible. His savings had evaporated paying for a motel until he could sort things out. But things never got sorted out. Now at 52, the former Army sergeant who had once commanded respect and led men through the deserts of Iraq found himself huddled in the recessed doorway of a closed bookstore, his possessions reduced to what fit in a worn backpack, a change of clothes, his military ID, a tattered photograph of his late wife, Marie, and a Silver Star medal he couldn't bring himself to pawn. The coffee shop across the street had allowed him to use their bathroom to wash up this morning, a small kindness from the young manager who sometimes slipped him a day-old muffin. It was more consideration than most showed. Michael had learned quickly that homelessness made you invisible. People's gazes slid past you as if you existed in another dimension, close enough to share the same physical space, but separated by an unbridgeable gulf of circumstance and discomfort. His stomach growled. The dollar could buy nothing substantial, but the McDonald's 3 blocks away had dollar coffee. And on a day like today, warmth mattered more than food. He tucked the bill deeper into his pocket and pulled his threadbare coat tighter, preparing to abandon his sheltered doorway for the journey. The first fat snowflakes had begun to fall when he spotted her. She wasn't dressed for the weather. That was his first thought. Her tailored pantsuit offered no real protection against the dropping temperature, and she wore no coat, just a thin silk scarf that fluttered uselessly in the wind. She stood at the curb, staring at her phone with increasing distress, tapping at the screen with manicured fingers that had begun to tremble slightly in the cold. Michael watched as she attempted to hail a cab, but the few that passed were already occupied. She checked her watch, her movements becoming more agitated. Even from the doorway, he could see her breath coming in white puffs, growing more rapid with what appeared to be rising panic. He shouldn't get involved. People like her, professional, put together, purposeful, rarely welcomed interaction from people like him. But something in her growing desperation called to him. Before he could reconsider, Michael found himself emerging from his doorway, crossing the street with the careful gait he'd developed since his knee had been shattered by an IED 15 years earlier. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, keeping a respectful distance. "Are you all right?" She startled, taking an instinctive step back. Her eyes performed the usual quick assessment he'd grown accustomed to, taking in his unkempt beard, the layers of mismatched clothes, the telltale backpack. But instead of the usual dismissal, her gaze lingered on his face. "My phone died," she said, holding up the blank screen. "I have an important meeting across town in 20 minutes and my ride canceled. I can't get an Uber and there are no cabs." Her voice held the controlled panic of someone used to managing crises who suddenly found herself without options. "The subway station is just around the corner," Michael offered, gesturing down the block. "I know, but there's a delay on the red line. That's why I was trying to get a cab." She rubbed her arms, the thin fabric of her blazer providing little insulation. The snow was falling more heavily now, clinging to her dark hair. Michael hesitated only a moment before reaching into his pocket. He withdrew the dollar bill, holding it out to her. "The bus stop is 1 block that way. Number 47 will get you downtown in 15 minutes this time of day. It's only $1. She stared at the money in his outstretched hand, confusion crossing her face. "You're offering me money? It's just $1, he said, feeling suddenly foolish. "But the bus is reliable. More than cabs in this weather." A complicated series of emotions crossed her face. Surprise, hesitation, and something else he couldn't quite identify. She made no move to take the money. "I can't take your..." she began, then stopped, reassessing him with a more careful look. Something in her expression shifted. "Are you sure?" "Yes, ma'am. I'm not going anywhere important today." He attempted a smile, though his chapped lips made it painful. Slowly, she reached out and took the dollar. Their fingers brushed momentarily, her warm skin against his cold hand. And Michael felt a jolt of something he hadn't experienced in a long time. Simple human contact. "Thank you," she said, her voice quieter now. "That's very kind." Michael nodded, already retreating. He'd done what he could. Now it was time to disappear again, to become invisible before the moment grew awkward. "Hey, wait," she called after him. "What's your name?" He paused, surprised by the question. Few people asked his name anymore. "Michael," he said. "Michael Winters." "I'm Claire," she replied. "Claire Donovan." He nodded acknowledgement, unsure what else to say. The snow continued to fall between them. "Thank you, Michael," she said again, more firmly this time. Then she glanced at her watch and her eyes widened. "I have to go." He watched as she hurried toward the bus stop, dollar in hand, her heels clicking against the wet pavement. An unusual interaction, but it was over now. Michael turned back toward his doorway, resignation settling over him like the snow on his shoulders. He'd have to find somewhere else to get warm today. Claire Donovan barely made it through the glass doors of Donovan Enterprises' downtown headquarters, with 2 minutes to spare before the board meeting. Her assistant, Melissa, met her in the lobby with wide eyes and a tablet. "Where have you been?" Everyone's already in the conference room, and Morgan is practically pacing a hole in the carpet. "Phone died, car service canceled, subway delayed." Claire replied tersely, running a hand through her snow-damp hair. "Is the presentation ready?" "Loaded and waiting. Here's your coffee." Melissa handed her a steaming cup from the executive lounge. "Do you want to stop by your office first?" "No time." Claire took a sip of the coffee, savoring the warmth as it spread through her chest. The heat reminded her of the cold man on the street, Michael, and the dollar bill now tucked in her pocket alongside her dead phone. A homeless man had given her his money. The reality of that encounter hit her properly for the first time as she stood in the marble lobby of the building her father had built. A man with nothing had offered her. A woman who had everything, his last dollar. "Claire?" Melissa prompted, glancing nervously at her watch. "Right. Let's go." She pushed the thought aside, straightening her shoulders and shifting into CEO mode. The posture and mindset that had carried her through the 3 tumultuous years since her father's death had left her in charge of a company she'd never expected to run. The boardroom fell silent as she entered. 8 men and 2 women in expensive suits turned to watch her approach. At the far end of the table, Victor Morgan, her CFO and her father's oldest friend, checked his watch with exaggerated concern. "Glad you could join us, Claire," he said, the false warmth in his voice failing to mask his irritation. "We were beginning to worry." "Traffic," she replied simply, taking her seat at the head of the table. "Shall we begin?" The next 2 hours were a blur of quarterly reports, projection graphs, and thinly veiled power plays. Victor's presentation on the company's financial outlook contained the same warning it had for the past year. Their market share was shrinking, innovation had stalled, and unless dramatic changes were made, Donovan Enterprises would continue its slow decline. "The trust issue remains our biggest liability," he said, gesturing to a slide showing declining customer satisfaction scores. "Since the data breach last year, we haven't regained consumer confidence. The foundation your father built this company on was trust, and right now, we're hemorrhaging it." Claire felt the familiar twist in her stomach. The data breach had occurred 3 months after she took over as CEO, a catastrophic security failure that had exposed thousands of customers' financial information. Though the company had responded quickly, the damage to their reputation had been severe. Some board members, Victor chief among them, had been quick to suggest that her inexperience was to blame. "We have the new security protocols in place," she countered, "and the compensation program for affected customers." "With all due respect," interrupted Diane Walker, head of marketing, "it's not enough. We need something more. Human oneness can one of funds. The public sees us as another faceless corporation that can't be trusted with their information." "What do you suggest?" Claire asked, working to keep defensiveness from her tone. "A complete rebranding," Victor said before Diane could answer. "New leadership, new direction, new public face." The implication hung in the air. New leadership meant her removal as CEO. Victor had been pushing for this since the breach, positioning himself as the experienced alternative to Claire's untested leadership. "That's premature," Claire said firmly. "Our fundamentals are still strong. We need to reconnect with our core values, not abandon our identity entirely." "And what exactly are those core values, Claire?" Victor asked, leaning forward. Your father built this company on trust and reliability. What are you building it on? The question stung because it hit at her deepest insecurity. What was she building? She'd been so busy keeping the company from sinking that she hadn't articulated a vision of her own. In the silence that followed, Claire's hand unconsciously touched her pocket, feeling the folded dollar bill through the fabric. A man with nothing had trusted her with his last dollar. The thought returned unbidden. We need to rebuild trust, she said finally. Not just say it in press releases, but demonstrate it in every action we take. People trust people, not corporations. We need to be more human. Victor scoffed slightly. Meaningless platitudes won't save our stock price. I'm not talking about platitudes, Claire said, a new certainty forming as she spoke. I'm talking about a fundamental shift in how we operate, starting with our charitable foundation. This caught the board's attention. The Donovan Foundation had been her father's pride, but since his death, it had operated on autopilot, writing checks to the same organizations year after year with minimal oversight. I'm announcing a new initiative, she continued, the idea crystallizing as she spoke. The Donovan Trust Project. We're going to identify individuals, real people, who demonstrate exceptional trust and integrity despite difficult circumstances. We'll highlight their stories and provide them with life-changing opportunities through the foundation. That sounds expensive and unfocused, Victor objected. How does this help our bottom line? It reminds everyone what this company stands for, Claire replied, her confidence growing. We don't just talk about trust, we celebrate it, we reward it, we embody it. And in the process, we reconnect with the values that made Donovan Enterprises successful in the first place. The board members exchanged glances. Claire could read their skepticism, but also their curiosity. She hadn't spoken with this kind of conviction in months. I'll have a detailed proposal by next week, she promised. For now, let's continue with the agenda. As the meeting progressed, Claire found her thoughts returning to Michael Winters and his outstretched hand offering his last dollar to a stranger. If that wasn't a demonstration of trust, she didn't know what was. And she suddenly knew with absolute certainty that he would be the first person she needed to find for her new initiative. Finding a homeless veteran in Boston in December proved more challenging than Claire had anticipated. For 3 evenings after work, she returned to the street where she'd met Michael, searching the doorways and alleys nearby, but found no sign of him. The bookstore owner hadn't seen him, nor had the baristas at the coffee shop across the street. On the 4th evening, as snow fell in thick, wet flakes that muffled the city sounds, Claire finally spotted a familiar figure huddled under the awning of a closed laundromat 2 blocks from their original meeting place. He sat on a flattened cardboard box, a thin blanket wrapped around his shoulders, staring vacantly at the passing traffic. Claire approached slowly, suddenly uncertain. In the warm conference rooms of her corporate office, finding Michael had seemed like a perfect beginning to her initiative. Now, standing on the slushy sidewalk watching him fight the cold, she felt presumptuous. What right did she have to turn his struggle into a corporate redemption story? Still, she had to try. She owed him that much. Michael? She called softly when she was a few feet away. His head snapped up, eyes instantly alert with the wariness of someone accustomed to being approached for the wrong reasons. Recognition dawned slowly. "Bus lady?" he said, his voice rough from disuse or cold. Claire smiled. "Claire," she reminded him. "I made it to my meeting thanks to you." He nodded but said nothing, clearly confused by her reappearance. "I wanted to return this," she said, reaching into her coat pocket and pulling out a crisp $20 bill. With interest, Michael's expression hardened. "I don't need charity." "It's not charity," Claire insisted. "It's repayment of a loan. You helped me when I needed it." He studied her face, searching for the lie or the pity. Finding neither, he slowly reached out and took the money, tucking it quickly into his jacket. "Thank you," he said stiffly. Claire hesitated, suddenly realizing she hadn't thought beyond this moment. What now? She couldn't simply announce that she wanted to make him the face of her corporate initiative. "Would you like to get some coffee?" she asked impulsively. "It's freezing out here, and I'd like to talk to you about something." Suspicion clouded his features. "About what?" "A project I'm working on. Nothing illegal," she added quickly. "Just a conversation. I'll buy the coffee." Michael considered this for a long moment. Then he glanced up at the darkening sky and the steadily falling snow. "There's a diner around the corner. They don't mind if I sit there." Perfect. The walk to the diner was silent, Michael keeping a careful distance between them. Claire noticed how he moved stiffly, favoring his right leg. Inside, the warmth of the small restaurant enveloped them, carrying the comforting smells of coffee and grilled food. The waitress nodded at Michael with familiar recognition as they slid into a booth by the window. "Your usual, Mike?" she asked, already pouring coffee into a mug. "Thanks, Darlene." He wrapped his hands around the mug, savoring the warmth before taking a sip. "And for you, miss?" The waitress turned to Claire. "Coffee, please." And she glanced at the menu quickly. "2 cheeseburger specials?" She looked questioningly at Michael, who hesitated before giving a small nod. "Coming right up," Darlene said, disappearing behind the counter. Michael took another sip of coffee, watching Claire over the rim of his mug. "So what's this project?" Claire considered her words carefully. "I run a company," she began. "Donovan Enterprises. We're starting a new initiative through our charitable foundation to highlight people who demonstrate extraordinary trust and integrity. And you're looking for candidates," Michael said flatly. "Let me guess. The homeless vet who gave away his last dollar makes a good story?" The directness of his assessment made Claire flush. "That's part of it," she admitted, "but not in the way you think. Your gesture affected me deeply. It made me realize how rare true generosity is, especially when it comes at personal cost. It was just $1. It was your only dollar," Claire countered gently, "and you gave it to a complete stranger who, by most measures, needed it less than you did." Michael shrugged uncomfortably. "You needed help." "Exactly. You saw someone in need and you helped, without calculation, without expectation of return." Claire leaned forward. "That's extraordinary, Michael." He looked away, embarrassed by her praise. "What exactly are you proposing?" "I'd like to interview you for our foundation's first profile. We'd share your story, with your permission and input, of course. And we'd offer assistance, housing, medical care, help navigating the VA system, whatever you need to get back on your feet." Michael's jaw tightened. "So I'd be your charity case, your company's good deed." "No," Claire said firmly. "You'd be our teacher, someone who reminds us what matters." He met her eyes then, searching for insincerity. "Why me? There are thousands of homeless vets in this city alone." The question hung between them as Darlene arrived with their food, placing steaming plates of burgers and fries before them. Claire waited until she'd gone before answering. "Because you helped me," she said simply. "And because I think there's more to your story than a man down on his luck." Michael stared at his plate, the scent of the hot food making his stomach growl audibly. He picked up a fry, considering her words as he ate it slowly. "What happens if I say no?" he asked finally. "Then we finish our meal. I wish you well, and that's the end of it," Claire replied. "No pressure, no obligations." Michael nodded, seemingly satisfied with her answer. He took a bite of his burger, closing his eyes briefly at the simple pleasure of hot food. Claire began eating as well, giving him space to think. They ate in companionable silence for several minutes before Michael spoke again. "I was a sergeant in the Army. 2 tours in Iraq. Got my knee shattered by an IED during the second tour." He said this matter-of-factly, without self-pity. "Came home, got work as a security consultant. Had a wife, Marie. A house in the suburbs. Normal life." He paused, taking a sip of coffee. Claire waited, sensing there was more. "Marie got sick. Cancer. It moved fast. Between the medical bills and taking time off to care for her, we burned through our savings. She died 2 years ago." His voice remained steady, but his fingers tightened around the mug. "I was managing until the VA screwed up my benefits. Listed me as deceased somehow. Without that income, I couldn't keep up with the mortgage. Bank foreclosed, and here I am." "I'm so sorry," Claire said softly. "About Marie and everything that followed." Michael shrugged again, but the gesture seemed more defensive than dismissive. "Life happens, but I'm not looking for pity. That's not what I'm offering," Claire assured him. "I'm offering a partnership. Your story in exchange for practical help getting back what you've lost. And what does your company get out of this?" Claire appreciated his directness. "Honestly, good publicity. A reminder to the public that we care about more than profit margins. But that doesn't make the help any less real." Michael considered this, methodically finishing his burger as he thought. Claire didn't rush him, finishing her own meal in silence. Outside, the snow continued to fall, transforming the city into something softer and quieter. "I need to think about it," he said finally. "Of course," Claire replied, relieved he hadn't rejected the idea outright. "Can we meet again? Same time tomorrow?" Michael nodded. "I'll be here." Claire paid the bill, leaving a generous tip that made Darlene smile. As they prepared to leave, she hesitated, then reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. "My number," she said, placing it on the table. "And this," she set a prepaid phone beside the card. "It's activated and charged, in case you need to reach me." Michael looked at the phone without touching it. "That's not necessary." "Please," Claire said. Consider it practical, not charitable. I'd like to be able to contact you, and this makes it possible. After a long moment, Michael pocketed both the card and the phone. At the door, they paused, the cold air rushing in as other patrons entered. "Thank you for dinner," Michael said formally. "Thank you for your time," Claire replied. "And Michael, whatever you decide, I'm glad I found you again." He gave her a small nod before turning away, limping slightly as he disappeared into the snowy night. Claire watched him go, wondering if she'd see him again. She hoped so. There was something about Michael Winters that intrigued her beyond his potential value to her initiative, a dignity and integrity that remained undiminished by his circumstances. As she hailed a cab to take her back to her empty penthouse apartment, Claire realized she'd felt more engaged, more purposeful during this simple diner meal than she had in months of board meetings and corporate functions. Whatever happened next, something had shifted within her, and for that, she already owed Michael more than he knew. Michael didn't sleep that night. The thin mattress at the shelter provided little comfort, but it wasn't physical discomfort that kept him awake. It was Claire Donovan and her unexpected proposition. He turned the prepaid phone over in his hands, studying its smooth surface in the dim light. A direct line to a world he'd once been part of. A world of business meetings and agendas, of purpose and direction. A world now as distant as Mars. Trust. She wanted to make him a symbol of trust. The irony wasn't lost on him. Once he'd commanded a platoon, responsible for the lives of men who trusted him with their safety. Once he'd been trusted with corporate security, protecting sensitive information for clients. Once Marie had trusted him to take care of her, to make everything all right. And he'd failed, hadn't he? Not in Iraq, he'd brought every one of his men home alive. But he'd failed Marie. Failed to keep the promises he'd made to her as she'd faded away in that hospital bed. The phone suddenly felt heavy in his hands. What right did he have to be anyone's example? He was a man who couldn't even take care of himself. But Claire's words echoed in his mind. "You'd be our teacher, someone who reminds us what matters." What did matter anymore? The question followed him into uneasy dreams of desert heat and Marie's smile, and a woman in a business suit holding out her hand in the falling snow. Morning came with the harsh fluorescent lights of the shelter and the shuffle of men collecting their belongings before the 7 a.m. checkout time. Michael moved through his routine mechanically, washing up in the communal bathroom, packing his few possessions, nodding goodbye to the night staff. Outside, the city had been transformed by the overnight snowfall. A pristine white blanket covered the grime and garbage, creating an illusion of cleanliness and new beginnings that would last only until the morning commute churned it into gray slush. Michael made his way to a small public library where he often spent his mornings, warming up and using the computers for an hour at a time. Today, instead of checking job listings he was increasingly unqualified for, he typed Claire Donovan Enterprises into the search bar. The results surprised him. Claire wasn't just an employee, she was the CEO, the daughter of founder Robert Donovan, who had died 3 years earlier. There were articles about her unexpected ascension to leadership, speculation about her readiness for the role, and more recently, pieces about a data breach that had damaged the company's reputation. Michael studied her professional headshot. Claire in a blue blazer, her dark hair pulled back, her expression confident but approachable. Different from the flustered woman he'd met on the street, but recognizably the same person who had sat across from him in the diner last night, speaking with passion about trust and integrity. What was her angle? The cynical part of him, the part that had grown during his time on the streets, whispered that he was being used, that his story was just a convenient vehicle for corporate image rehabilitation. But there had been something genuine in her eyes when she'd thanked him for that dollar. Something real in her voice when she'd spoken about partnership rather than charity. The prepaid phone felt warm in his pocket. Before he could overthink it, Michael pulled it out and dialed the number on her business card. She answered on the second ring. "Claire Donovan." "It's Michael," he said, his voice sounding rough to his own ears. "From last night." "Michael," she replied, and he could hear the smile in her voice. "I'm glad you called. I've been thinking about your offer." "And?" Michael took a deep breath. "I have conditions." "I'm listening," Claire said, her tone serious now. "I don't want pity, and I don't want to be portrayed as some kind of saint. If we do this, it needs to be honest, the good and the bad." "Absolutely," Claire agreed. "Authenticity is essential, and I want to be involved in the process. No decisions about my story without my input." "Of course, you'd have final approval on anything we publish or share." Michael hesitated before voicing his final condition. "And I want to work, not just receive." Whatever help you provide, I want to earn it somehow. There was a pause on the other end of the line. That's important to you, isn't it? Contributing? Yes, Michael said simply. It is. Then we'll make it part of the arrangement, Claire replied. We can figure out the details together. Michael nodded, though she couldn't see him. Okay then, I'm in. Thank you, Michael, Claire said, and the genuine relief in her voice surprised him. Can you meet me at my office today? We can talk more and get you set up with temporary accommodations right away. He glanced down at his worn clothes and unwashed state. I'm not exactly dressed for a corporate office. Don't worry about that, Claire assured him. Come to the service entrance on Bedford Street at noon. I'll meet you there myself. After ending the call, Michael sat staring at the phone, wondering if he'd just made a terrible mistake or taken the first step toward rebuilding his life. Either way, he'd committed now, and commitment was something he understood. He spent the next few hours at the library, using the bathroom to wash up as best he could and brushing his teeth with a toothbrush and tiny toothpaste tube from a shelter care package. At 11:30, he began the walk to Donovan Enterprises headquarters, his military training automatically calculating routes and timing despite the snow slowing his pace. The massive glass tower rose 40 stories above the surrounding buildings, its sleek, modern design a stark contrast to the historic structures nearby. Michael approached from the side street Claire had specified, feeling increasingly out of place as he limped through the business district. The service entrance was a nondescript door beside a loading dock. Michael arrived at exactly noon, military punctuality ingrained too deeply to abandon. He stood awkwardly, unsure if he should knock or wait, when the door swung open. Claire stood there, not in the business attire he expected, but in jeans and a casual sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. She smiled when she saw him. Right on time, she said. Come in, it's freezing out here. Michael followed her into a service corridor, instantly enveloped by the building's warmth. Claire led him to a freight elevator, using a key card to summon it. I thought we'd meet in my private office rather than the executive floor, she explained as they stepped inside. More comfortable for both of us. The elevator ascended smoothly to the top floor. When the doors opened, they revealed not a corporate reception area but a comfortable living space. A penthouse apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of snow-covered Boston. You live here? Michael asked, momentarily forgetting his discomfort. Sometimes, Claire replied with a small smile. When work runs late or the weather's bad, the company keeps a few apartments in the building for executives. She led him through a tastefully decorated living room to a small dining area where lunch had been laid out. Sandwiches, soup, and a carafe of coffee. I thought we could eat while we talk, she said, gesturing for him to sit. Make yourself comfortable. Michael remained standing, suddenly acutely aware of his shabby appearance in these pristine surroundings. I haven't been able to shower properly in days, he said bluntly. I don't want to ruin your furniture. Understanding crossed Claire's face, followed by a flash of embarrassment at her oversight. There's a bathroom through that door, she said, pointing. Clean towels, soap, shampoo, whatever you need. And Trier. She crossed to a closet and opened it, revealing men's clothing. Jeans, sweaters, button-up shirts. These belong to my father, she explained. He kept clothes here for overnight stays. You're about his size, I think. Please help yourself to whatever fits. Michael hesitated, the offer of clean clothes and a proper shower almost overwhelming after months of making do with shelter facilities and public restrooms. Take your time, Claire added gently. Lunch will wait. Something in her tone, respectful without being pitying, made the decision for him. Thank you, he said simply, gathering a set of clothes and heading to the bathroom. 30 minutes later, Michael emerged transformed. The hot shower had been glorious, the sensation of being truly clean almost forgotten in his months on the street. He'd trimmed his beard using a razor he found in the bathroom cabinet and combed his hair neatly. The clothes, dark jeans and a navy blue sweater, fit well enough, though they hung slightly loose on his frame, which had grown leaner during his time homeless. Claire looked up from her tablet as he entered, her eyes widening slightly. You look human again? Michael suggested with the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. I was going to say more comfortable, Claire replied, returning his smile. But yes, that too. They sat at the table, and Michael found himself ravenous. The simple meal of tomato soup and turkey sandwiches, tasting better than anything he could remember eating in months. Claire ate more slowly, occasionally making notes on her tablet. So, she said once they'd finished, I've been thinking about your conditions, especially the part about working rather than just receiving. Michael nodded, wiping his mouth with a napkin. What did you have in mind? Well, obviously, the first priority is getting your VA benefits straightened out and finding you proper housing. Our legal team can help navigate the bureaucracy, and the foundation can cover temporary accommodations until that's sorted. And in return, Michael prompted. Claire set down her tablet. In the short term, I'd like you to consult on the Donovan Trust Project. Help us shape the initiative, identify other candidates, review our messaging. Your perspective would be invaluable. Michael considered this. And longer term? That depends on your interests and skills, Claire said. Your military background and security experience could be useful to the company. Or the foundation could help you pursue education or training in a new field. We want to provide opportunity, not dictate your path. It sounded too good to be true, which made Michael naturally suspicious. And all this in exchange for telling my story? Claire met his gaze directly. Your story is just the beginning. What I'm really interested in is your perspective. Your understanding of trust, resilience, integrity. Those aren't just buzzwords for you. They're qualities you've lived by, even when life gave you every reason to abandon them. The sincerity in her voice was disarming. For a moment, Michael glimpsed the person behind the CEO, someone genuinely seeking to understand, to connect. I'm not some kind of moral exemplar, he said quietly. I've made plenty of mistakes. That's precisely what makes your perspective valuable, Claire replied. Perfect people don't exist, but people who maintain their humanity and dignity through extreme hardship, they have something to teach the rest of us. Michael stared out at the snow-covered city below, considering her words. The cynical part of him still whispered caution, but another part, a part he'd thought long buried under months of survival mode, responded to the challenge she presented. When do we start? He asked finally. Claire's smile brightened the room. What do we already have? The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. True to her word, Claire arranged temporary housing for Michael in a furnished apartment owned by the Donovan Foundation, located just a few blocks from headquarters. The legal team began untangling his VA benefits situation, discovering that the clerical error listing him as deceased had been compounded by several subsequent mistakes. Michael spent his days at Donovan Enterprises, working with Claire and a small team she'd assembled to develop the trust project. His military precision and attention to detail proved valuable as they crafted criteria for identifying candidates and structured the assistance programs. In the evenings, Claire often joined him for dinner, sometimes at his apartment, sometimes at restaurants nearby. Their conversations ranged widely, from the project to their personal histories, from current events to philosophical discussions about trust, resilience, and redemption. Michael found himself increasingly comfortable in Claire's presence. She listened intently when he spoke, asked thoughtful questions, and shared her own vulnerabilities with surprising openness. He learned about her strained relationship with her father, her reluctance to take over the company, and her struggles to live up to the legacy he had left. He never thought I was tough enough for business, she confided one evening as they sat in his apartment sharing takeout Chinese food. Too soft-hearted, he said, as if compassion were a weakness rather than a strength. Some men confuse hardness with strength, Michael replied, thinking of certain officers he'd served under. They don't understand that true strength often lies in knowing when not to be hard. Claire studied him over her container of lo mein. You're not what I expected, Michael Winters. What did you expect? I'm not sure, she admitted. Someone more, broken perhaps, bitter about what life has dealt you. Michael considered this. I was for a while. After Marie died, after losing the house, there were some dark days. What changed? He set down his chopsticks, searching for the right words. I realized that bitterness is a luxury. When you're focused on survival, you can't afford to waste energy on resentment. That sounds like wisdom rather than necessity, Claire observed. Michael shrugged. Maybe they're the same thing sometimes. As they worked together, Claire noticed subtle changes in Michael. He stood straighter, spoke more confidently, began to reclaim the authority that had once been natural to him. The haunted look in his eyes didn't disappear entirely, but it retreated, replaced by increasing focus and purpose. For his part, Michael observed Claire's transformation as well. In the office, she'd initially been somewhat tentative, seemingly caught between asserting her authority and seeking approval. But as the trust project took shape and gained enthusiastic support from most of the board, her confidence grew. She began to articulate a vision that was distinctly her own, not a shadow of her father's legacy. 2 weeks after their arrangement began, Claire invited Michael to attend a board meeting where she would formally present the trust project. It would be his first official introduction to the company leadership. "Are you sure about this?" he asked when she proposed it. "I'm still technically homeless. Your board might not appreciate my input. That's exactly why they need to hear from you." Claire insisted. "This isn't just a PR initiative. It's about reconnecting with what matters. You represent that better than anyone." The morning of the meeting, Michael dressed in a suit the foundation had provided. His first since the one he'd worn to Marie's funeral had been sold to pay bills. He studied his reflection in the mirror, barely recognizing himself. The gaunt, defeated man from the street had been replaced by someone who looked almost like his former self. Clean-shaven now, hair neatly trimmed, standing straight despite the old pain in his knee. Claire met him in the lobby, professional in a charcoal suit but with a warmth in her eyes that had become familiar. "Ready?" she asked. "As I'll ever be," Michael replied, adjusting his tie one last time. The boardroom fell silent as they entered together. Michael felt the weight of curious stares as he took a seat beside Claire at the head of the table. Victor Morgan, whom Michael recognized from news photos, narrowed his eyes at this unexpected addition to the meeting. "Ladies and gentlemen," Claire began, "before we discuss the trust project in detail, I'd like to introduce Michael Winters. Michael is a decorated Army veteran who will be consulting on this initiative. His insights have been invaluable in shaping our approach." She didn't mention his homelessness, Michael noticed. That would come later, he knew, when she shared his story as the catalyst for the project. For now, she was introducing him as a colleague, not a charity case. The presentation proceeded smoothly until Victor Morgan interrupted with pointed questions about the budget and return on investment. "This seems like an awful lot of resources devoted to feel-good stories," he said dismissively. "How exactly does this address our core business challenges?" Before Claire could respond, Michael spoke up. "Trust isn't a feel-good story, Mr. Morgan. It's the foundation of all successful relationships, personal or business." His voice carried the quiet authority developed through years of military command. "When Donovan Enterprises experienced that data breach, you didn't lose market share because of the breach itself. You lost it because customers no longer trusted you with their information." The boardroom grew very quiet. Victor's eyes narrowed further. "And you're an expert on corporate trust, Mr. Winters?" "I'm an expert on what happens when systems fail the people who depend on them," Michael replied evenly. "And on what it takes to rebuild that trust." Claire smoothly reclaimed the conversation, guiding the discussion back to the specifics of the initiative. By the end of the presentation, most of the board seemed cautiously supportive, though Victor and a few allies remained skeptical. As they left the boardroom, Claire squeezed Michael's arm briefly. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for speaking up." "Did I overstep?" he asked, suddenly concerned. "Not at all. You said exactly what needed to be said." Her smile was warm with something beyond professional appreciation. Victor needed to hear it from someone he couldn't easily dismiss. That evening, they celebrated the board's provisional approval with dinner at a small Italian restaurant near Michael's apartment. The atmosphere between them was lighter than usual, buoyed by their success and the promising path ahead. "To new beginnings," Claire said, raising her wine glass. "And unexpected partnerships," Michael added, touching his glass to hers. They talked and laughed, the professional boundaries that had defined their relationship beginning to blur around the edges. When Claire mentioned a childhood memory of visiting her grandmother in rural Vermont, Michael found himself sharing stories of his own grandmother's farm in Pennsylvania, stories he hadn't revisited in years. "It sounds peaceful," Claire said wistfully. "I've been thinking lately about how disconnected I've become. From nature, from normal life, from what matters. Running a company will do that," Michael observed. "It's more than that," Claire replied, her expression growing thoughtful. "After my father died, I was so focused on proving I could handle the job that I forgot to question whether the job was worth handling, at least in the way he defined it. And now," she met his eyes, "now I'm remembering there are other definitions of success." The moment stretched between them, laden with unspoken possibilities. Then Claire's phone buzzed with an urgent email, breaking the spell. Reality reasserted itself. She was still a CEO with responsibilities. He was still a homeless veteran finding his footing. Yet as they walked back to his apartment in the cold night air, something had shifted between them. When they reached his door and Claire turned to say goodnight, Michael found himself reluctant to end the evening. "Would you like to come in for coffee?" he asked, the invitation simple but significant. Claire hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I'd like that." Inside, as Michael prepared the coffee, Claire wandered to the small desk where he'd been working on his contribution to the Trust Project, a personal essay about his experiences and the lessons they'd taught him. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to the handwritten pages. It's not finished, Michael warned, bringing 2 mugs to the coffee table. And I'm not much of a writer? I doubt that, Claire said, sitting beside him on the sofa and accepting her coffee. She began to read, and Michael watched her face as she absorbed his words. His description of the moment he'd realized he had nowhere to go after the foreclosure, the crushing anonymity of homelessness, the small kindnesses that had sustained him, and finally the unexpected moment of connection when he'd offered his last dollar to a stranger. When she looked up, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. This is beautiful, Michael, and powerful. It's just the truth, he said simply. That's what makes it powerful. Claire set the pages down carefully. You've never once presented yourself as a victim, even when you had every right to. Victimhood is a perspective, not a circumstance, Michael replied. I learned that in Iraq. 2 soldiers could experience the exact same event. One was destroyed by it, the other found meaning and moved forward. And you're the second kind, Claire observed. I try to be, Michael said. I don't always succeed. They sat in comfortable silence, sipping their coffee, the unfinished essay between them on the table, a bridge between their worlds. Michael, Claire said finally, her voice soft but determined. I need to tell you something. He tensed slightly, recognizing the seriousness in her tone. What is it? When I first approached you about the trust project, I wasn't being entirely truthful. She met his eyes directly. I was thinking primarily about the company's image, about using your story to rebuild our reputation. It was calculated. Michael nodded slowly. I suspected as much. But that's changed. Claire continued. Working with you, getting to know you, it's reminded me why I joined the company in the first place. Before my father's expectations took over, I wanted to make a difference, not just a profit. And now I want this project to succeed because it's the right thing to do, not just the right PR move. She placed her hand tentatively over his. And I want you to succeed, Michael Winters, because you deserve it, not because your story makes a good corporate narrative. The honesty of her confession touched him deeply. Michael turned his hand beneath hers, interlacing their fingers in a gesture that acknowledged the connection that had been growing between them, a connection that transcended their professional arrangement. Thank you for telling me, he said quietly. I don't want secrets between us. Claire replied, the implication of a future together hanging in the air unspoken. When she left an hour later, their goodbye at the door lingered, neither quite ready to put words to the shifting nature of their relationship. But as Michael closed the door behind her, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Not just hope for a better future, but anticipation of one that might include companionship, understanding, and perhaps even love. The formal launch of the Donovan Trust Project came 3 months after Michael and Claire's first meeting. In that time, Michael's life had transformed dramatically. His VA benefits had been reinstated with back pay, providing him financial independence. He'd moved from the temporary apartment to a small but comfortable condo purchased with his military pension, and he'd accepted a permanent position with the Donovan Foundation as Director of Veteran Outreach, focusing on identifying and supporting homeless veterans through the Trust Project. The launch event was held in the atrium of Donovan Enterprises headquarters, a gala fundraiser attended by Boston's business elite, political figures, and media. Michael, dressed in a tailored suit that fit his now healthier frame perfectly, stood at the edge of the crowd, watching Claire work the room with graceful confidence. She caught his eye across the space and smiled, excusing herself from a conversation with the mayor to make her way to his side. Nervous? She asked, straightening his already straight tie in a gesture that had become familiar. About speaking to 500 people about the lowest point in my life? Michael replied dryly. Not at all. Claire laughed, the sound brightening the formal atmosphere around them. You faced enemy fire in Iraq. Surely this is easier. Debatable, he said, but smiled despite his anxiety. At least I know you'll be up there with me. Their relationship had evolved over the months into something neither had fully defined, but both treasured. They worked together daily, often shared meals, and had grown increasingly comfortable in each other's presence. But both had maintained a careful professional boundary, aware of the complications their personal feelings could create for the project. Before Claire could respond, Victor Morgan approached, his expression carefully neutral. Despite the board's eventual unanimous approval of the Trust Project, Victor had remained skeptical, occasionally making thinly veiled comments about charity cases and distractions from core business. Claire, the senator is asking for you, he said, pointedly ignoring Michael. And the press wants photos before your speech. I'll be there in a moment, Victor. Claire replied coolly. When he'd moved away, she turned back to Michael. He's still convinced this is all an elaborate PR stunt. Isn't it partly? Michael asked with gentle irony. It began that way, Claire acknowledged. But it's become something more important. The evidence of that transformation surrounded them. In addition to Michael, the Trust Project had identified and supported 15 other individuals whose stories embodied extraordinary trust and integrity in difficult circumstances. All were present tonight, their lives already changed by the program's assistance with housing, education, healthcare, and employment. And beyond the direct beneficiaries, the project had sparked something in Donovan Enterprises itself. Claire had used the initiative as a catalyst for broader changes in the company's approach to business ethics, customer relations, and employee support. The corporate culture was shifting, becoming more aligned with the values the Trust Project championed. It's time, Claire said as the event coordinator signaled to her. Ready to inspire some wealthy donors? Michael offered his arm. Lead the way, CEO Donovan. They made their way to the stage together, the crowd's applause washing over them as they took their positions at the podium. The massive screen behind them displayed the Trust Project logo, a simple design of open hands supporting a rising sun. Claire spoke first, welcoming the guests and outlining the project's mission and accomplishments. Then, with a warm introduction, she turned the microphone over to Michael. He looked out at the sea of faces, business leaders, politicians, media figures, and momentarily felt the gulf between their world and the one he'd inhabited on the streets. But then he spotted Darlene from the diner, whom he'd invited personally, sitting proudly in the front row. Beside her was Jose from the shelter, now employed as the Trust Project's outreach coordinator. Their presence grounded him, reminding him why he was here. 3 months ago, he began, his voice steady. I was homeless, a statistic, invisible to most of the people in this room. The ballroom grew quiet, the usual murmur of gala conversation fading to attentive silence. I had $1 to my name, Michael continued. Just $1 between me and nothing at all. And then I met Claire Donovan. He recounted their first meeting, the simple act of offering his last dollar, and the unexpected journey that had followed. He spoke without self-pity or grandiosity, simply relating the facts of his fall from stability and his gradual climb back. What I've learned, he said as he neared the end of his speech, is that trust isn't just a virtue or a value, it's a lifeline. When Claire trusted me enough to see beyond my circumstances, she didn't just change my life. She reminded me who I was beneath the labels society had placed on me. Michael turned slightly, meeting Claire's eyes. And that's what the Trust Project does. It recognizes that behind every statistic is a human being with intrinsic value and potential. It invests in that potential not as charity, but as a recognition of our shared humanity and interdependence. The applause when he finished was thunderous, the crowd rising to their feet in a standing ovation that visibly moved even Victor Morgan, who stood clapping at the back of the room with a thoughtful expression. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations, interviews, and conversations with donors eager to support the project's expansion. By the time the last guest departed, Michael was exhausted but exhilarated. The event had raised over $5 million, far exceeding their targets and ensuring the Trust Project could grow beyond Boston to other cities. You were magnificent, Claire said as they stood alone in the empty atrium, the cleaning crew working quietly around them. I knew you would be. We were magnificent, Michael corrected her. This is your vision, Claire. I'm just one part of it. She shook her head. No, it's our vision now. I couldn't have done this without you. And I don't just mean your story. Your insight, your commitment, your integrity. They've shaped everything we've built. Michael felt the weight of her words, the significance of what they'd accomplished together, and what might lie ahead. 3 months ago, he'd been huddled in a doorway, hopeless and alone. Now he stood in the headquarters of a major corporation, respected, employed, and connected to a woman who had come to mean more to him than he'd thought possible after Marie. What happens now? He asked quietly. Claire took his hand, her fingers warm against his. Now we keep building. The project, the foundation, whatever comes next. She paused, something vulnerable flickering in her eyes. Together, I hope. The word held more than professional implications, and they both knew it. Michael squeezed her hand gently, taking a chance on the future that had seemed so impossible on that snowy day when he'd offered his last dollar to a stranger. Together, he agreed, and in that simple word was a promise of partnership, of possibility, of trust in what they might become. Outside the glass walls of the atrium, snow began to fall on Boston once more. Not the harsh, threatening snow of winter, but the gentle, renewing snow of early spring, covering the city in promise of new beginnings. And within those walls, a homeless veteran who had once had nothing but $1 to his name, and a CEO who had been searching for someone to trust, stood hand in hand, their unlikely connection a testament to the transformative power of seeing beyond circumstances to the true worth of a human heart. Sometimes the most profound journeys begin with the smallest gestures. For Michael Winters and Claire Donovan, it had begun with a single dollar and the priceless trust it represented.